Today we're here at University of Arizona at the Translational Cardiovascular Research Center with Erik Blackwood. So Dr. Blackwood, I'd like you just to tell me a little bit more about what motivated your interest in science and perhaps a bit about your path that brought you here to University of Arizona.
Sure. Well, my interest was originally in clinical medicine, and I was thinking about pursuing an MD in the field of either cardiology or neurology. And then by almost complete luck, I joined the lab that I have stuck with to this point in my career, focusing on proteostasis in heart disease and neurodegenerative diseases and developing novel therapeutics. So that idea of going from a basic discovery to a novel therapy really stuck with me, and that's why I'm here today.
Excellent. Was there a specific moment in your life that you knew scientific research was really the career path that you intended to follow, and that switch from medicine into preclinical?
I wish I could say yes, and there was that aha moment, but really it was becoming so enveloped in the research as a matter of time, and seeing myself grow and I guess mature from being a little bit younger and immature and naive to what research is and how it can be impactful.
Yeah.
And the work it actually takes to develop, like I said, these novel therapeutics, that something I loved and couldn't put down.
What challenges have you faced in establishing the center here at University of Arizona? As we know, it's quite new. Were there things that you had to kind of challenge and overcome?
There have been, but thankfully nothing that's institutional or on the academic side. It was really just COVID-19. So we moved from our original institution in San Diego State University to University of Arizona 3 months after everything shut down, and everything was already in the process. So shutting down a lab, packing it up, moving it across state lines was a little bit of a balancing act, but we got it through, and U of A has been extremely supportive of really building this program here with my PI, Christopher Kambatsi, being the director of the center, and myself and our interest in not only recruiting additional faculty, but building a very translationally focused research program. So really it was COVID-19, but that's impacted all of us.
All of us, definitely. With science being so dynamic and the new advancements that are always emerging, what strategies do you employ to kind of keep up with the ever-changing landscape of scientific research?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I think a lot of young scientists don't appreciate too much, and that's one, the importance of reading primary literature. And I would say probably about 30% of my actual day is doing just that, between that and grant writing, seeing what's being published in our field and related fields. Specifically in the cardio field, it's always that cancer and neuro are about 5 to 10 years ahead of us. So if you read more of their papers, we're learning from them as we go along. And then also collaboration. So I take every advantage of every conference that I can go to learn from other people, what they're working on, how their programs are built, the equipment they have. And a lot of time, people like yourself are there representing companies, and that's how we learn about equipment that becomes available. Between the Aspect MRI system we have here, which until this point, it really was a 7T system you had to work with. That was a huge dedication, and now it's more mobile. And then also the ultrasound that you're demoing today. So.
Yeah, perfect, excellent. Tell us a little bit more about the program that you have going on here, maybe some of the current projects that you have going on. And some of the overarching long-term goals of the center.
Right. So we moved here for a number of reasons, one of which was we knew we wanted to move a lot of our small molecule developments into a larger animal models. U of A has the capacity to allow us to do that, having the facility here to move those, like I said, into swine models of either myocardial infarction or HFrEF, heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. So that was one motive for actually coming here. Our research globally focuses on how proteins are folded correctly and misfolded in the context of different diseases, not only in the heart, but as I alluded to, also the brain. And we've been allowed to continue that research here with more funding and also the recruitment of additional faculty who are going to complement that. And then again, at the end of the day, the idea is always on a translational mindset where we take that basic discovery, how can we target that as a new therapeutic, and very quickly test it in our preclinical animal models of heart disease and Alzheimer's disease.
Nice. What advice would you give to people just starting out in their research career, for those who haven't really started their career yet, whether it be graduate students, undergraduates, or postdoctoral research fellows?
Well, granted, I still am young in the field. I'm just hopefully about to enter a professorship, but I will say be prepared to work hard and really enjoy what you end up doing. I know it sounds cliche to say that, but kind of when you enter the research field, especially younger, you don't appreciate how things can develop really quickly if you're truly dedicated to it, and always be willing to learn. So again, most of my time is spent going to conferences and talking to people who are more knowledgeable than I am and taking advice from them. And then pretty early on, especially when you're dealing with institutes like the NIH and other funding agencies, there's a lot of just acronyms that you're not aware of. So the more you're around the institute, the more you're around the program itself, you're only going to succeed. And I think the last thing is, to an extent, never say no. Always be willing to push yourself and take on more on your plate, and be available. I think that really helps along the way. And you have learned to find your own balance and your own boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. Women in STEM, obviously something that's quite important to me.
Of course.
What area of things, how do you think we can improve it? Are there perhaps things that are already being done to encourage young women to enter and pursue a career in science?
Yes, things are being done. I think not enough. And a lot of it's coming from, or will have to come from, dedicated institutes and individuals from actually pursuing opportunities, especially for women, but also minorities in that context in the fields of STEM. Here at the U of A, we have a Women in STEM program where we meet on a monthly basis, and my PI, who's also the Associate Dean for Research, is very supportive of that. And we really try to encourage as best we can. And I think also, especially now in the younger generation, I don't even know what that's called anymore, to promote science to younger women, and again also minorities, at the high school and lower levels.
Definitely.
So before we moved, and we're trying to do this also here too, we actually brought in high school students from local high schools who could volunteer in the lab and see what research was like.
Awesome.
And that's where you can kind of really change people's minds as to what research is, which for a lot of people who are new to it, it's kind of a black box of in between actual like the clinicians and seeing patients and really industry. And so academic research especially is a little bit of an unknown. So I think more efforts by people, and again, as I said, institutes to make that more accessible to women and minorities at a younger level would go a long way.
I love when we're at conferences and we see the day when the high school students come in.
Yeah.
I absolutely, from a company standpoint, love it when they come by the booth and try to kind of exchange as much information and build
Yep.
that excitement that I can.
That's a really good point too. So in the American Heart Association, for instance, has been really great about having dedicated days towards women in cardiovascular disease and kind of get over that hump, and how do you get into a professorship role, what kind of funding opportunities are there, and trying to get more involvement there. So that's also been nice to see.
Moving now more to the testimonial side of things,
Yeah.
if we can. What challenges have you been able to solve using the products that you've purchased from Scintica, specifically the surgical stations that are off to your right, including the rodent surgical monitor and the anesthesia and ventilator setups?
There, it's been reproducibility, and workflow. So for us, coming from our previous institute, and this was just how the system was, we had one surgical station. Now, we're moving into 3, and it was very, practical. I'll say it that, in that you as the experimentalist have to know everything about the animal you're working with. Here, that guesswork has kind of been taken away with the ventilation systems in particular, and then the survival rate will of course go up with that too. So that's been excellent. And for the other systems too, we're looking forward to actually getting more sensitive measurements and outputs, especially for cardiotoxicity and cardiac remodeling, specifically as we're working with the MRI and the PET system here too. When we start working with FDG, and the heart is a great place to use that because of how in heart failure, when the source of fuel changes from fatty acid oxidation to glucose utilization, and you can detect those changes by doing these kind of assays that we weren't able to do before.
What challenges have you been able to solve using the Doppler Flow Velocity system, which you purchased previously and I believe have brought with you?
Yeah, so that one also has been reproducibility. So one of my first surgical maneuvers I was doing was transaortic constriction in mice, and I actually learned that from a Joe video. So of course, when you're learning that, not from being taught it from an experienced individual, you want to make sure you're going to take extra efforts to be consistent. So that was, the reason we actually purchased that system is we were measuring blood flows in the innominate and left common carotid to make sure those ratios were common across all of our TACs. And any animal that was outside that ratio, then we could exclude from that study. So there again, it's been reproducibility, and we've been able to get away with lower ends because of it. We just had a paper published where we're getting away with ends less than 10 as opposed to in the teens, which when you can cut back on animal lives you have to use, that's always a benefit too.
Perfect. We're standing right here next to the Aspect PET MRI system, and I'm just wondering what challenges you hope to solve using the system once you get it up and working in the center here.
Sensitivity is the biggest one, of course. So a lot of the stuff we're doing with small molecule development, what we do, and it ends up taking an unanticipated long amounts of time and experimental man hours, is toxicity studies. And this is just going to be one example of what we're going to use the system for. And I could go on and on about what else we're going to use it for. But here we're going to be able to look at very sensitive measurements of any sort of deformations that might happen as a result of chronic dosing of our compounds, which would exclude it from moving forward to a larger animal model and certainly from clinical trials down the road.
Perfect. When considering all vendors you have worked with, is there anything about Scintica in specific that stands out in terms of others in the marketplace?
Of course, and I mean, again, this is going to be cliche, and it's not just because Tonya is here, but it's really been about the customer service. And I mean, even since you've been here today, it's been really appreciated and not unnoticed how you'll see when things didn't come, just as we expected to, and even things that I missed too as we're setting things up. And that attention to detail has been very much appreciated.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Of course.
What conferences do you attend, and do you always go to the same ones yearly? And what's your favorite thing about going to these conferences? I can imagine the answer.
Yeah, so I've been very lucky since I started my PhD that my mentor always pushed that, and he would always fund that when needed, whenever we couldn't look into external sources. But typically we do go to a lot, at least one, if not two. I know COVID has kind of put an impasse in in-person conferences, so the virtual presence has been a little interesting to figure out. But because I am on the committees for ISHR, I do go to those every year. Now that the next one in Denver is coming up this year, and that'll be in person, and then the World Congress next year in Berlin is also scheduled to be in person. AHA, Scientific Sessions, BCVS, we usually attend those, and then, I mean, if you can't go to anyone else, it's going to be a Gordon conference for what has been called cardiac regulatory mechanisms. And that's been great because you live in a dorm for just over a week with PIs, and people are experts in the field, and you're completely immersed in it for a whole week.
We find those smaller conferences a really great way for people to network, get to know each other. As
Right.
you said, meeting people from around the world. It's something that even in industry have kind of continued on, obviously. But finding those people at those smaller conferences and being able to have those very candid and open conversations about science, I find really beneficial.
Right. One I used to host with before we moved, it's called the Alternative Muscle Club. And that was based in San Diego. And again, that kind of came to a halt because of COVID-19, but that was always nice because it was only early careers. And so PIs, one might be invited to give a keynote talk, but other than that, it was really about promoting ECIs, and whenever we could get them involved with vendors and people who were invited to, that was always really nice. And it was more intimate too.
Yeah, definitely.